All right, so the last strategy we're going to look at is one that the Cushman's been very intrigued by of late. And he did some drafts to kind of see how his teams would pan out. And this is, can you draft tight ends kind of early and heavy and still have a well-rounded team that will produce for you? Yes or no? So Jay, what do you think about how this team you picked out of the six hole with tight end early in mind?
Well, I was going to say that I am almost sold on this strategy, but the more I look at it, the more I think about it, still very much on the fence. I did a couple of drafts with this strategy in mind, um, and the teams looked like this. All right, I had the first one I did. I took Jimmy Graham in the first round. I took Arian Foster in the second. Julius Thomas in the third. I ended up with Michael Floyd. I got Stafford as a quarterback in the fifth. MJD in the sixth. Woodhead in the seventh. Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Tavon Austin, LeGarrette Blunt, and so on and so forth. Um, it looks like a pretty decent team to me, but it definitely suffers at running back and wide receiver. That's my problem. Is looking at this. As I've stated before, I'm a very big fan of getting good running backs so that I don't have to do much guesswork with that. Um, the second league I did, I actually went and freaking drafted three tight ends for this team. Now I'm going to mention that this draft I did in mind for a team or a league that has you can play a tight end and it has two flex positions that both can have tight ends. So I would technically be able to play all three of these guys every week. I drafted Jimmy Graham, Julius Thomas, and Vernon Davis. Jimmy in the first, Julius in the third, Vernon Davis in the sixth. My wide receivers are Wes Welker, Michael Crabtree, Terrence Williams, Brandon Cooks. My running backs are Le'Veon Bell, Ben Tate, Frank Gore, and D'Angelo Williams. Again, decent team. Not something I'd be jumping up and down or roster rating over. I think you really, when drafting early tight ends, you have to incorporate late round streaming quarterback strategy for sure. And you need you got to wait on tight ends. Here's the thing: you got to take Jimmy in the first. Don't do what I did and take Julius Thomas in the third or Vernon Davis in the sixth. Wait on guys, grab a Jordan Reed, a Zach Ertz late, maybe even take a gamble on Eric Ebron, Bennett. Kyle Rudolph, I think, is going to have a good year this year. You can get all those guys later so that in that third and sixth round, like in the third round, I could have had Jordy Nelson. Or no, I could not have. I could have had Randall Cobb, Pierre Garcon, Larry Fitzgerald, Vincent Jackson, Wes Welker. And any of those guys, I think, is probably actually going to put up more points on a weekly basis than Julius Thomas. In the sixth round, I could have had Michael Floyd. I could have had Emmanuel Sanders, Kendall Wright. I could have had Joique Bell, Rashad Jennings. So there's definitely talent to have there. I don't know if taking those tight ends early. Get Jimmy early. He's going to be the guy you stick in your tight end position that's going to knock the ball out of the park for you every week and outscore whoever you're playing against in that position. But wait on your tight ends a little bit later, and I think this position has some merit. I think it can be, definitely used. Grab Jimmy Graham and a couple running backs right away, and then go wide receiver heavy for a while. Grab a quarterback and then some more tight ends. See what it looks like. As a matter of fact, after we get done with this, I might hop back on and do another mock draft just to see what it looks like. But yeah, I like it somewhat. I'll have to get back to you on whether or not I think it's definitely something I would use. You know me, Rob. I've never been somebody that wants to pick a tight end early. I've always preached against it, as a matter of fact. That might change a little bit, but I don't know if I'm going to go real heavy on tight ends yet. I don't know if I'm sold on that. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think what we learned from this is that, and I'm more comfortable, I'm similar as you. I was kind of against it and scared to go Jimmy Graham in the first round historically. I think if you're going to go, tight end early, I think you get Jimmy in the first, and then that's it. Like you don't need to draft another one. I think what happens is there's within the different positions, the skill positions, there's guys that you hear names and you get excited about those guys because of their brand recognition. Guys like Julius Thomas, guys like Vernon Davis, they're studs at their position, but when you look at what they do point wise per week, there's a couple dozen of those at the other positions putting up those same points per week. So even though the name recognition is big and you're like, holy crap, I got these studs, they're not necessarily outperforming wide receivers. They're not actually outperforming a lot of wide receivers and running backs that are drafted at that same
Yeah.
ADP. So the
And that,
point is and that's under the circumstance if you have multiple flex positions that I don't recommend necessarily drafting those tight ends to put in these multiple flex scenarios.
no, I
Um,
agree. I think that's exactly what happened to me. As I was kind of looking at the strategy a little bit, and I'm like, man, you could really do this. But then I'm thinking, and it actually is what happened is the name recognition. I'm like, well, Jimmy Graham, Julius Thomas, Vernon Davis, these are all guys that were top three in their position, minus Tony Gonzalez, who's obviously retired. I was like, well, that's like 50, 60 points a week. Well, if you actually do the math and look at their averages per week, it's more like 20, 40 points a week, which I think you're right. You're going to get more production out of having a wide receiver or a running back in that position. I think, you might want to do this if maybe you get to a point and you're picking and you're looking for a guy and you're like, well, I can either take this guy, Kenny Stills, per se, in the 12th round, or Zach Ertz, which one of those guys is going to put up more points? Maybe, but that's, stretching it, I think.
yeah. Well, yeah, and that's just so. Let's just look at it. So, from a point perspective, Jimmy Graham this season or in today's ADP is right now going at the 108. So you definitely have to take him in the first round if you're gonna get him. So if you're in a draft spot that's in the middle towards the latter part of the first round, he's an option for you. And last year he scored 19.2 fantasy points per week in a PPR league. Other skill players going just after him in current ADP are guys like Dez Bryant. He scored 18.4 last season. AJ Green scored 19.5, more than Jimmy did. Brandon Marshall 19.1. So all these guys are scoring just about the same at various different skill positions, but the difference with Jimmy Graham is you are gonna dominate at your tight end position hands down. Like we're not talking about flexes and stuff. We're talking about you have to play a tight end in every week, and Jimmy is gonna dominate your opponent that week, probably by 6 or more points in a given week every single week. And
Let me
that's
let me stop you right there. That's a good point. What if, and I'm just, this actually just kind of popped in my head here. So what if you take Jimmy Graham first overall, not to play him in your tight end spot? Do what I normally do and take a tight end later in the draft. Somebody like a Greg Olsen, a Jordan Reed, somebody like that who you're going to throw in your tight end position and maybe battle it out. But what if Jimmy Graham is actually one of your flex plays?
Well, I think at the end of the day, you're still got to total the points your guys scored
No,
and
I,
pair
I
that.
agree. I agree. But having Jimmy Graham in your flex would be, I don't know. You're right, actually. It's total points scored, but that's still an interesting.
Yeah, I hear you. And like Julius Thomas, for example, his current ADP is the 3-4. He averaged 13.6 points a week last season. So let's compare that. So Jimmy averaged 19.2. Julius Thomas, who's the second tight end off the board, averaged 13.6. So we're talking, like 6 points, 6, 7 points difference just by those two guys alone. That's why Jimmy's such a stud, and that's why picking him in the first round, in the middle or latter part of it, is worth it. But if you instead of getting Julius Thomas in the third, you could get guys like Zach Stacy. He averaged 15.3 points last year, 2 points more than Julius Thomas. Pierre Garcon, you could get instead of Julius Thomas in the third at the end of the third round. He averaged 5 more points a week than Julius Thomas did. Keenan Allen, you could get there. He averaged like a point more than Julius Thomas did last season. So then you look at guys like Vernon Davis. Well, you can get him in the sixth. Is he still a value there? Well, he averaged 13.7 points a week last season. You can get Kendall Wright, who's averaging the same amount. You can get Danny Woodhead, who averaged more than Vernon Davis did last year in a PPR. So I think that's all being said. I think that's an argument for waiting on tight end, getting skill position. There's several guys there who can put up just the same amount of numbers or better. Especially you hit on a Pierre Garcon or somebody who just kills it, and all of a sudden you're outperforming that position by 6 or 7 points. Greg Olsen is going a round and a half later than Vernon Davis. At the end of the seventh round. You can get him, and he scored 11.9. If my tight end scores me almost 12 points a week, and I got him at the end of the seventh round, and this is in a 12-man league, I am thrilled. Absolutely thrilled. Because I got him at the end of the seventh versus wasting a draft pick on a guy like Julius Thomas, who only outscored him by basically 1.5 points per week, and I will take that all day and twice on Sunday.
Yeah. Now that's what I was asking is like you take, like you said, wait and take your Greg Olsen who's going to score your 12 points a week in your tight end position. You're happy with it. Would you what I was asking is would you take Jimmy Graham first overall anyway and not even use him as a tight end, put him in as a flex player?
Yeah, I just think that.
Do you think it's worth your first overall pick to have a guy that's going to score you 20 points a week in your flex position?
Yeah, I just have to think that through. I don't know if it matters at the end of the day again, just because you have to. It's just a matter of total points at the end of the. To answer, Jimmy Graham, of course, is probably going to outscore your opponent in the flex position by a large margin, just like he would if he was your starting tight end at the tight end position. Whereas the tight end if they both hit, if the tight end that you got late hit, and he outscored your opponent's tight end every week on average, or at least. The 10 weeks that 11 weeks you're not having to play Jimmy Graham, or of course he's on your own team, but some other stud of that caliber, then it's probably a win all the way around. It's just more or less a gamble.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was thinking too with this strategy, and I think which is actually the most appealing part to me, is you get to name your team like Tight Ends Are Us or Tight Ends Smorgasbord, if you will. That to me, that's the biggest draw for the strategies.
Yeah.
Witty name.
Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Gronkowski here because.
Yeah.
I have to do it. The guy. He's as talented, or some people would say he's more talented than Jimmy Graham. If they play a 16-week season, they would bet that Gronk would. Potentially outperform. I think he's done it in the past.
If they play a 16-week season, Jimmy Graham can do that.
Yes, and that's just it. We all know that's just it about Gronk. But if because of that, Gronk's ADP has dropped than what Jimmy is, and as we get closer to the season, we'll know. But if his ADP is still in the third, fourth round, and he ends up playing sooner than we thought, and he plays more games than you think, then his value there will ultimately pay off. But that you're rolling the dice.
I drafted him in the as you know, because I traded him to you. I drafted him in the 7th round last year, and I was like, all right, Gronkowski in the 7th round. This guy, last year before the season started, they were like, oh, he's going to be out, 4 weeks probably. Then it turned to 6, and he didn't come back till like 11 or some shit like that. I traded him to you. You still had to wait like 4 weeks to play the son of a bitch. You gotta mention him. He's a fucking amazing tight end. If the guy can stay healthy, and you can get him in the 7th round, you're running around freaking mushroom stamping everybody's head all season long, for sure. But let's be honest and real and just say it. Gronkowski is not gonna probably play the whole. He's probably not even gonna start this season. So who knows when he's gonna start? I wouldn't touch him.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous of him too. He's coming off multiple surgeries. I would not be surprised at all if he ends up on the PUP list to start the season, which is a mandatory deal that he's out for 6 games like he was last year. So I'm kind of a guy I'm staying away from. In FFPC formats where you're getting 1.5 points per reception for tight ends, so you're getting an extra half point, versus wide receivers and running backs per catch. That might change it a little bit, and that might change your strategy altogether. I'll give a little shout out to my buddy Chris Banks. He played, I think, 200 of these leagues last year, where it was 1.5 points. per tight end. So that changes your strategy altogether. And he drafts tight ends early and often, and you can't blame him for that.
That's Chris Banks at I Play Fantasy.
On Twitch, absolutely. I Play Fantasy. It's a great listen. You learn a ton, especially for those people. He designed his whole Twitch setup around helping people like you and me who are, played multiple years, maybe just with our buddies and neighborhood and people like that, and want to branch off into playing high stakes leagues. So the Cushman and I are actually going to co-own a team in the FFPC this year. So we'll kind of let our followers know how that goes and how that's different and how you draft differently and just how much harder it was or isn't or whatever than what we thought and so forth as we explore that new option. So anyway, I think that's it for our show this week. On our next show, we'll be talking about daily fantasy leagues. This is kind of where this seems to be going, and all these people are excited about these daily fantasy leagues. I know Jay dabbled in this for the first time last season. So, what are daily fantasy leagues? How do they work? How's the strategy different when you play these versus what you do on an every week basis in redraft leagues? So we're going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of playing daily fantasy and break that down for you. Kind of on a side note here, we'll also be giving away a free entry into a $25 league at Derby City Fantasy, or actually DerbyCityFootball.com. So DerbyCityFootball.com will be giving away a free entry into one of their $25 leagues. So keep an eye out on our Twitter account at Red Zone Warriors to find out how to win. We'll be doing some promotions here in the next couple of weeks before our next live show. So in the meantime, go to RedZoneWarriors.com where you can watch all of our previous episodes, see our rankings, and subscribe to our show via iTunes. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and tweet us all your fantasy football questions at Red Zone Warriors. So for the Cushman, I am Rob, the Commish Smith. And remember that if you are taking a fantasy off season, then you are already losing. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.